Hello. Today we're going to be talking about structurally diverse families. The first thing we need to do when looking at any chapter in any textbook is to look with empathy and a critical eye. There are lots of things that are said in this textbook that have to do with the success of nuclear families and the hardships of single families. Um, that are really case specific. So we should not just assume, because we see statistics, that there's one way of being a family that's a better way than another family may be encountering. So when you read these textbooks, please keep in mind that these are generalizations and there also might be cases of bias that go on in any textbook or any book that or article that you may read. So, the first thing that we're going to be investigating are nuclear families, and they are households that are a married couple with children. And we can see that the rate of families like this, which would have been in the 70s considered the norm when 40% of the families were married couples, have now dwindled to about 17.8% in 2021. So, there's been a real drop of nuclear families in raising children in the United States. So, how do we support nuclear families that are in our classrooms? Well, the first thing is studies have found that nuclear families appreciate suggestions for home activities. So, feel free to send home different things for them to do as a family. Make sure that you schedule events at various times, as in all likelihood, both parents are working. The needs of nuclear families can be diverse. So it might be that the husband works nights and the wife works during the day. So we want to make sure that you can accommodate them and maybe see them at different times. Also, be aware of children who might be latchkey children, which means they have to let themselves into the house. Um, Having home care is very, very expensive. So having childcare on top of schooling can be too much for any working family. So it might be that kids are coming home to houses where they're making their own snacks and having their own homework that they have to supervise. Do not assume that this is neglect. In New York State, there is actually no age where a child cannot be left alone. As long as the parent considers that the child is able to take care of themselves. Once the parent has determined that the child is able to take care of themselves, they are allowed to go home on their own. So once we go in with the idea that this child's being neglected, we're really not supporting the needs of the family. Another type of family that we want to look at is extended family households. Um, and that may be parents who live with their parents. It could be families that have aunts and uncles in the home. It could be lots of different situations where lots more relatives are actually living in the home. And we can see that 50%, 7% of Black families and 35% of Hispanic children live in extended households. So it's a very frequent thing that they don't just live in a household with a mother or with a father or the mother and father. In fact, they live in households where there's lots of relatives. So, some tips for working with extended families is, first off, you have to find out that there are extended families. You don't want to make sure that there's a lot that if there are other people involved, that you find out who they are and what their involvement is. They should be allowed to include family members in any activity or assignment that involves the family. You want to invite them to school events. So a lot of times people are like, only one person can come, and that's really difficult when you're talking about these larger families. And when you have parent-teacher conferences, don't be surprised if other family members come in, and make sure you've got extra chairs so that they're not standing, they don't feel like outsiders. We want to welcome diverse families into our schoolrooms. Now, lots of families live in a single parent household, lots of kids. And it's 19 million children are living with a single parent. And that's under the age of 18. So this is a very frequent way that children are raised. So here's some tips for working with single families. You want to make sure that they're convenient times because you've got one person working. It's very difficult for them. They have additional children. You want to make sure that there's childcare. Um, Make sure that there's ways they can be involved that doesn't involve them having to come to the school. So take home activities can really help. And the more support you give, the better. We really want to be a resource for the family. So having after school activities or homework help can really be very important for this type of family. Um, Having them connect with other families, so they can carpool, or if the kid's sick, they can having those resources of other families just in case can be absolutely terrific. So if the school can help do that, it's a real plus. Um, and be sensitive to their financial needs. A lot of times we have all different types of fundraisers. So make sure that there's a way that they can opt out, especially at the beginning of the year when you ask for supplies. So blended family is when a child lives in a household with a step parent, half sibling, or step siblings. There can be lots of different configurations of this. And that's 16% of the children in the United States. That's a lot of kids. So the tips for working with blended family is you need to know if they've been recently remarried or if they had to move or change schools. That can be a lot of upheaval for a little kid, and you want to support them as they go through that. Include that non-custodial parent communications and school activities so they feel welcome. It doesn't just have to be the legal guardian of the parent. Other people can come in too. If there's have visitation with another parent with homework assignments, first off, make sure both parents know, different families know about the need for homework assignments. And also, if there's an issue when the child is going to the other house with homework not being done, then you might want to double up when they're at the other parent's household. You really need to figure out what works in terms of this child. When you're doing gifts or pictures, let them do more than one picture. And be aware of family names. So you want to use the right name because sometimes one will be mom and one will be mama. Whatever they do, we want to know. Okay, so now we're going to talk about same-sex couples that are parents. And that's a lot of kids as well. We have 114,000 kids being raised by same-sex couples. So when you're working with LGBTQ families, you want to make sure that there's an anti-discrimination policy that includes sexual orientation that's communicated with families. You have to show that you are open to working with all different types of families. You want to make sure that you don't have just a space for mother or father on there. You want to make sure that it's parents' names or family names so the parent is not having to cross it out and write father, other father's name, or mother, other mother's name. Also think about the terminology. Are they being called, one being called dad and the other one being called papa? Is one being called mom and the other one's being called mama? Find out the names so you get to figure it out. Does the school hold celebrations such as Mother's Day or Father's Day? Now, we see this as an issue in so many different areas of working with different types of families. And I think that the assumption we can make is celebrating Mother's Day or Father's Day in school is really problematic. So unless every kid in your school is in a nuclear family, this can be a really tough day. And it's good just to maybe leave it out or say Family Day or Parents' Day, as opposed to doing that, because if you don't have a mother, you stand out. If you don't have a father, you stand out. If you're making two Father's Days cards, you stand out. If you're making two Mother's Days cards, you stand out. So we really need to be sensitive to that. You want to not censor material that depicts same-sex couples, because when you talk about families, in almost every early child classroom we talk about families, if kids don't see themselves represented, that's going to be really tough for them. And also, when we talk about families, we have so many different types of families, as we can tell in our classrooms and what our kids are being raised by. We want to make sure that all different families are represented in these curriculums. And that includes same-sex families. Now, you may say, well, I'll get fired if I do that. Well, if you have LGBTQ families in your school, you shouldn't risk it. It's not about getting fired. It's about representing the children. So you really need to take a stand and say, I want this child to feel accepted. I want the families to be accepted. So another one that the textbook talks about is children living with kin or family who are not parents. A lot of these kids are living in foster care systems with relatives. Some are living with grandparents. Some are living with family friends. So we call that living with kin. And that's a situation that's very common. There can be lots of reasons for it. It could be that the parent is in jail. It could be that the parent is very, very ill. It could be that the parent disappeared or the parent's on drugs. But we want to make sure that whatever the situation is, we're supporting this family. So the first thing we want to do is we want to acknowledge that kin as a primary caregiver. And we want to make sure that we want them to feel comfortable. We want them to feel accepted within the family. The last type of family we're going to be discussing are adopted families. And 1 in 35 children in the United States are adopted. So this is a frequent occurrence. Tips for working with adopted families is we want to become familiar with the family situation. We want to find out if the kid even knows that they were adopted, and maybe they don't want to have a discussion about that in front of the rest of the class. And if that's the case, we really want to respect their privacy. Sometimes kids feel comfortable sharing their adopted story, and it's okay to have classroom conversations about different families when talking about family history. You can allow the child who's adopted to talk about the culture from where they come from, but not every child knows about the culture that they're adopted from. So we really want to make sure that they're aware of their culture before we assume that they can bring it into the classroom. And when parents have newly adopted their children, the more that we can share observations and information about what the child is like in school, the better. They're just learning about their child just like you are. And so we really need to help them partner in learning more about their child and their development.